Elder Commander Zyxx'thriax gazed out over the joint species training facility with all four of his crystalline eyes, each one twitching in barely concealed disdain. 50 million years of martial excellence coursed through his biomechanical frame, and now he was expected to. What was the human phrase? Play nice with these primitive bipeds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as the latest batch of human recruits stumbled into formation. Their movements were chaotic, undisciplined, nothing like the perfect geometric arrangements that had made the Eternal Dominion the masters of 17 galactic sectors. Most esteemed Elder Commander, his aide, Junior Tactician Vex Thor, transmitted directly into Zyxx's neural matrix. The humans appeared to be attempting to organize themselves. Attempting being the operative word Zyxx transmitted back, not bothering to hide his derision. He watched as one human nearly tripped over their own boots. How had these creatures even managed spaceflight? The Eternal Dominion had perfected the art of war when humanity's ancestors were still picking insects out of each other's fur. They had crafted battle formations that could shatter planets, developed tactical algorithms that could predict enemy movements centuries in advance, and built weapons that could unmake stars. And now, thanks to some bureaucratic nightmare called the Galactic Coalition Peace Initiative, they were required to train alongside species that had barely mastered fusion power. Did you know Zyxx broadcast to his assembled command staff that humans still use chemical projectile weapons in some of their ground forces? Actual propellant and metal slugs, like primitive savages. His officers chittered in amusement, their crystalline forms gleaming with mirth. One of them, Strategic Overseer Clicks AAA, added, "I heard they still rely on verbal communications in combat. Can you imagine? Actually shouting orders like animals." A human officer approached their group, and Zyxx noted with irritation that the creature's uniform wasn't even properly pressed. The human rendered what they presumably thought was a proper salute. "Elder Commander, sir." Lieutenant Chen reporting. "The 47th Training Battalion is assembled and ready for your inspection." Zyxx extended to his full 4-meter height, his crystalline segments realigning to create the traditional pose of superiority. "Very well, Lieutenant. Though I must point out that your formation spacing is off by at least 0.47 meters per unit. The Eternal Dominion achieved perfection in martial presentation during the Third Dynasty, approximately 47 million years ago." Lieutenant Chen's face twitched in what Zyxx's xenological database identified as a suppressed smile. How dare this infant species find anything amusing about proper military procedure? "With respect, Sir," Chen replied, "we find that allowing for slight variations in spacing helps accommodate different fighting styles and—" "Fighting styles?" Zyxx interrupted, his crystalline form vibrating with indignation. "The Eternal Dominion has calculated the mathematically perfect approach to every conceivable combat scenario. There is no room for variation." A sound emerged from the assembled humans that Zyxx's sensors identified as poorly concealed laughter. His command staff bristled, their crystalline forms emanating waves of ultraviolet light in patterns of outrage. Perhaps, Chen suggested, maintaining an admirably straight face, "You'd like to observe our morning combat exercises? We're running an interesting scenario today." Zyxx transmitted to his staff, "Watch closely. This should prove an educational example of exactly how not to conduct military operations aloud," he announced. "Very well, Lieutenant. Show us what passes for tactical excellence among your kind." As they moved toward the training grounds, Zyxx couldn't help but notice one of the human recruits watching him. The nameplate read Jenkins, and the human wore an expression that the Elder Commander's database couldn't quite categorize, something between amusement and challenge. The sheer presumption of it all. These creatures had been fighting wars for what, 5,000 years? A mere blink in the cosmic scale of combat. What could they possibly teach the Eternal Dominion about warfare? Zyxx'thriax had no idea that he was about to find out exactly why the universe's oldest species would soon be begging to learn from humanity's youngest soldiers. The training simulation chamber hummed with ancient power as holographic projectors created a perfect replica of the Battle of Seven Suns, one of the Eternal Dominion's most celebrated victories. Zyxx'thriax had personally selected this scenario, eager to demonstrate proper military doctrine to these undisciplined humans. "The objective is simple," he announced, his crystalline form pulsing with smug confidence. Defend the quantum relay station against waves of hive mind attackers. The Eternal Dominion achieved victory here using formation pattern Delta 7, perfected over 12 million years of tactical refinement. Lieutenant Chen studied the holographic battlefield, head tilted. Sir, permission to deploy troops, according to human tactical doctrine. Granted, Zyxx transmitted to his staff with a burst of ultraviolet amusement. Let them learn from failure. The simulation began. Swarms of hive mind forces materialized, a fearsome sight that had broken countless armies. The human troops, instead of adopting the mathematically perfect Delta 7 formation, scattered like startled prey animals. Absolutely disgraceful strategic overseer clicks AA transmitted. They've already lost cohesion. The transmission cut off as Private Jenkins did something that made Zyxx's crystalline structure nearly shatter in shock. The human soldier had climbed onto a defense turret, manually overrode its targeting systems, and was now lying on top of it. Chen's voice crackled over the comm. What in God's name are you doing? Sir Jenkins called back, grinning as he used the turret like some primitive mechanical bull. These alien guns have a blind spot in their targeting arc, but if you ride them manually, he swung the turret in a wild pattern that should have been completely ineffective. Instead, it cut through the hive mind forces with devastating accuracy. Impossible, Zyxx broadcasted. That violates 12 separate principles of optimal weapons operation. Yeah, Jenkins shouted back, somehow hearing the transmission. Well, sometimes you gotta rodeo that bronco your own way, sir. Speaking of which, Rodriguez, hold my energy drink. Private Rodriguez, already doing something equally inexplicable with a shield generator, caught the thrown container without looking. Jenkins proceeded to execute a series of movements that made Zyxx's tactical computers crash trying to analyze them. The human troops had transformed the battlefield into pure chaos. They were using shield generators as improvised springboards, relay beacons as makeshift grenades, and in one particularly horrifying case, Private Cooper was singing something called Cotton Eye Joe over the tactical channel while performing what he called the ultimate distraction dance. This is madness, Junior Tactician Zyxx'thriax declared. They're violating every principle of. The simulation ended abruptly. The holographic displays showed complete victory for the human forces, achieved in less than half the time of the historical battle. Silence fell over the chamber. Zyxx's crystalline form vibrated at frequencies indicating extreme cognitive dissonance. His tactical computers were still trying to process how the humans had achieved victory using methods that, according to 50 million years of military doctrine, were completely impossible. Lieutenant Chen approached, maintaining that infuriatingly calm expression. Permission to explain our approach, Elder Commander. Zyxx managed to realign his crystal lattices enough to respond. Please, enlighten us. Your Delta 7 formation was perfect, Chen began, and that was its weakness. The hive mind could predict exactly where every unit would be because they were positioned optimally. We introduced chaos as a tactical advantage. But the calculations, Zyxx's voice trembled. The perfect angles of attack. With respect, Sir Jenkins chimed in, still hanging off the turret. Sometimes you gotta chuck the calculator out the window and go with your gut. Your digestive organs make tactical decisions, Zyxx'thriax asked, horrified. It's a figure of speech, Rodriguez explained, still casually juggling plasma cores that absolutely were not meant to be juggled. Like how I learned that trick from failing my physics exam 3 times. Sometimes not knowing something's impossible is the best way to make it possible. Zyxx found himself doing something unprecedented in his 3-million-year career. He began to doubt. The humans had achieved victory using methods that violated everything the Eternal Dominion held sacred about warfare. Their approach had been chaotic, undisciplined, and entirely effective. Lieutenant Chen, he finally managed, his crystalline form still trembling slightly. I request a detailed analysis of your tactical approach. Happy to provide it, Sir Chen replied. Though fair warning, some of our best strategies came from what Private Jenkins calls hold my beer moments. What is this beer and why must it be held? Clicks AAA asked. Trust me, Chen said with a slight smile. It's better if we save that explanation for another day. But first, would you like to see how we handle orbital combat scenarios? Rodriguez has this crazy idea involving solar winds and something called surfing. Zyxx'thriax, Elder Commander of the Eternal Dominion, master of 17 galactic sectors, felt his perfectly ordered world beginning to crack. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to learn from these chaos-embracing humans after all. Behind him, Jenkins was attempting to teach a group of fascinated junior tacticians how to drift in zero gravity using emergency thrusters. The sound of their crystalline forms scraping against corridor walls echoed through the facility, accompanied by very human military-like whoops of joy. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The Eternal Command Center's crystalline walls pulsed with agitation as Elder Commander Zyxx'thriax loaded their most prestigious battle simulation, the defense of the 7th spiral. Where the Eternal Dominion had held off an invasion force 50 times their size. This scenario, Zyxx announced, his voice resonating with pride, has never been defeated using any alternate strategy. The perfect defense, as calculated by our greatest tactical minds, is the only solution. Lieutenant Chen studied the holographic battle map, absently chewing on a stylus, a habit that made Zyxx's crystalline structure shudder with disapproval. Interesting. Mind if we try something? You may attempt to improve upon perfection, Zyxx transmitted to his staff with a burst of sarcastic luminescence. Though I must point out that 50 million years of tactical refinement. Yeah, about that, Chen interrupted, sketching something on his datapad. Has anyone ever questioned why you're defending this particular section of space in the first place? The assembled Eternal Commanders stared at Chen as if he'd just asked why space was dark. It's the optimal defensive position, Strategic Overseer Clicks AAA explained slowly, as if talking to a particularly dense child. Is it though? Chen pointed to a seemingly random point on the map. Because if you look at the enemy's approach vector, they're only coming this way because you're here. What if we just weren't? Zyxx's tactical computers began producing error messages. But the calculations, the perfect defense requires. Private Rodriguez, Chen called out. Remember that thing you were telling me about your gaming strategies? Rodriguez perked up from where he'd been inexplicably stacking ration cubes into what he called a snack fortress. Oh yeah, the why fight fair principle. In Stellar Conquest IV, when you're outnumbered, you don't defend the obvious choke point. That's what they expect. You hide your forces in the last place they'd look. This is not a game, Zyxx'thor protested, his crystalline form flickering with indignation. Everything's a game, if you're having fun, Rodriguez replied with a grin that made several junior tacticians emit distress frequencies. Before Zyxx could stop them, the humans had completely reorganized the defensive fleet. Instead of the mathematically perfect formation protecting the 7th spiral, they'd scattered their forces among nearby nebulae and asteroid fields. This is absurd, Zyxx declared. You've left the entire sector exposed. The simulation began. The massive enemy fleet arrived exactly as historical records showed. But this time, finding no resistance at the 7th spiral, they pressed forward, directly into the trap. What followed defied 50 million years of tactical doctrine. Human ships emerged from gas clouds, using solar flares as cover. They turned asteroid fields into makeshift projectile weapons. At one point, Private Jenkins convinced an entire squadron to place something called chicken with enemy dreadnoughts, causing them to collide with each other in their attempt to avoid collision. This violates at least 73 principles of space combat, Clicks AA wailed. You know what else it violates? Chen asked calmly. The enemy's expectations. Look at their formation, they're still trying to counter the perfect defense, but we're not even there. The holographic display told the impossible truth: the human forces were winning, and winning decisively. They'd turned the enemy's superior numbers against them, creating chaos in their perfectly ordered ranks. Zyxx watched in stunned silence as Lieutenant Chen coordinated the final stroke using the enemy's own momentum to herd them into a prepared kill zone. The simulation ended with a victory even more complete than the historical record. How Zyxx finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Our greatest tactical mind spent millennia perfecting. That's probably the problem, Chen said, still casual as if he hadn't just rewritten military history. You've spent so long perfecting one approach that you stopped looking for others. Sometimes the best solution isn't the perfect one, it's the one nobody sees coming. Private Rodriguez nodded sagely while balancing a ration cube on his nose. Like in chess, sometimes you sacrifice your queen to win the game. You deliberately lose your most powerful piece, junior tactician Zyxx'thriax asked, horrified. Only if it makes your opponent so worried about why you did it that they miss your actual plan, Rodriguez explained with a wink. Zyxx'thriax found his tactical computers updating themselves against his will, incorporating these impossible new variables. The humans were operating outside of any known strategic framework, yet achieving superior results. It was maddening. It was chaotic. It was effective. Lieutenant Chen Zyxx'thriax said formally, his crystalline structure aligning into the pose of reluctant acknowledgement, I begin to understand why the coalition insisted on this joint training program. Chen raised an eyebrow. Yes. Clearly they recognized that the eternal dominion had become Zyxx paused, searching for the right word, predictable. That's one way to put it, Jenkins called from where he was teaching junior tacticians something called space drifting in the simulator. We prefer to think of it as too awesome to think outside the box. I do not understand how boxes relate to tactical doctrine, clicks, AA complained. Don't worry, Chen assured her. We've got plenty more human idioms to confuse you with. Wait until you hear about pulling a fast one or flying by the seat of your pants. As the humans continued their unorthodox instruction, Zyxx'thriax realized something that would have been unthinkable just days ago. He was actually looking forward to learning more. Though he'd never admit it aloud, these chaos-embracing primates might just have something to teach the universe's oldest military force. Even if their methods made his tactical computers want to defragment themselves out of existence. The routine patrol of Sector 7 Alpha had been proceeding exactly according to regulations until reality itself tore open. Elder Commander Zyxx'thriax's crystalline form vibrated in frequencies of ancient terror as the quantum rift spewed forth shapes that hadn't been seen in 20 million years, the Void Hunters. Humanity's historical database would have compared them to a nightmarish fusion of deep-sea predators and black holes, if humans had been around when they last appeared. Impossible, Zyxx'thriax transmitted, his tactical computers struggling to process the threat. The Void Hunters were sealed away during the Fourth Dynasty's last stand. Less history lesson, more action, Sir Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm as the joint patrol fleet scattered to avoid the first wave of void energy torpedoes. What are we dealing with? The Perfect Hunter's strategic overseer clicks, AA replied, her crystalline form pulsing with panic. They adapt to and overcome any tactical pattern they observe. Even the Eternal Dominion's perfect strategies eventually failed against. Timeout, Private Jenkins interrupted, his patrol ship executing a barrel roll that should have torn it apart. You're saying they learn from patterns? Then let's not give them any patterns to learn from. Before the Eternal Command Staff could protest, Jenkins had already broadcast to the human ships, hey, why all? Remember that thing we did at Rodriguez's birthday party with the makeshift fireworks and the anti-grav generators? The one that got us banned from the recreation deck, Rodriguez asked, already grinning through the video feed. Exactly. But this time with quantum torpedoes. Zyxx watched in horror as the human ships broke every formation in the tactical database. They were flying like drunk asteroids, each ship moving in completely random patterns that defied prediction. The Void Hunters' adaptive algorithms began producing error messages. They couldn't predict what they couldn't pattern. This is madness, Zyxx'thriax declared. We must implement Emergency Protocol 7 Beta. It's our only hope. With respect, Sir Chen cut in. Your only hope is to stop doing what they expect. Rodriguez, remember that bug you found in the shield harmonics last week? The one that made them oscillate like a dubstep concert. Already on it, LT Rodriguez's fingers flew over his console. Jenkins, think you can make those void torpedoes dance? Like it's prom night, baby. What followed would have given any traditional military instructor an aneurysm. The human ships deliberately destabilized their shield harmonics, creating an unpredictable resonance pattern that somehow reflected the Void Hunter's energy weapons back at them. Jenkins had turned his patrol ship's tractor beam into what he called a space lasso, literally swinging enemy torpedoes in impossible arcs. They're violating every law of combat physics. Clicks. AA's voice reached frequencies only space dogs could hear. Laws were made to be broken, Chen replied calmly, coordinating the chaos like a conductor leading a symphony of insanity. Especially physics laws, right, Cooper? You know it. Sir Cooper's ship was now spinning in a corkscrew pattern while broadcasting what he called his ultimate battle playlist on all frequencies. Somehow, the combination of human music and erratic movement was creating sensor ghosts that confused the Void Hunter's targeting systems. Zyxx's tactical computers gave up trying to analyze the situation and initiated emergency shutdown. The humans weren't just thinking outside the box, they had taken the box, turned it into a weapon, and were now using it to play something they called cosmic tennis with void torpedoes. Lieutenant Chen Zyxx'thriax managed, watching as Rodriguez used an emergency quantum beacon as an improvised disco ball to disorient enemy sensors. I don't understand what's happening. That's the point. Sir Chen's voice was almost gleeful. If we don't understand what we're doing, neither can they. Sometimes the best strategy is no strategy at all. Jenkins, how's that space lasso working? Yeehaw, sir. Just rope me a couple of void cruisers. Anyone know if these things can do a square dance? The Void Hunters, faced with combat behavior that defied every tactical algorithm they'd evolved over millions of years, began to retreat. Their perfect adaptation capabilities had met their match in human unpredictability. As the quantum rift sealed itself, leaving behind a battlefield that looked like the aftermath of what Jenkins called a rager of a party, Zyxx'thriax turned to Chen with all four eyes blinking in confusion. Lieutenant, he said slowly, I believe I owe you and your species an apology. We have spent millions of years perfecting the art of war. And sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. Chen finished with a smile. Sometimes you need a little chaos in your order. Speaking of which, Jenkins, please tell me you're not still trying to teach that void torpedo to dance. Come on, sir. I've almost got it doing the Macarena. Zyxx watched as his tactical computers attempted to reboot, trying to make sense of a victory that, by all rights, should have been impossible. Perhaps, he realized, that was humanity's greatest strength. They didn't know what was impossible, so they just did it anyway. Lieutenant Chen, he announced formally, I believe it's time we revised the training curriculum. The Eternal Dominion has much to learn about. Thinking outside the box. Glad to help, Sir Chen replied. Though maybe we should wait until Rodriguez finishes turning that quantum beacon into what he calls a space disco revival. The universe's oldest military force had just been saved by its youngest allies, and nothing would ever be the same again. Somewhere in the distance, Cooper was still broadcasting his battle playlist, and several junior tacticians were caught trying to dance. As the Void Hunters regrouped for a final assault, Private Rodriguez sat bolt upright in his command chair, eyes wide with what Lieutenant Chen had learned to recognize as his absolutely insane idea face. Sir Rodriguez called out, Remember that old game I was telling you about? Portal. This is hardly the time for discussing primitive entertainment simulations. Elder Commander Zyxx'thriax began, but Chen held up a hand. Go on, Rodriguez. What's your crazy idea? The quantum rifts they're using. Rodriguez's fingers flew across his console, pulling up diagrams. They're basically teleportation gates, right? What if we could? You know, think with portals. Jenkins' face lit up. Oh man, like that time we rigged the training simulator too. Exactly. Rodriguez turned to Zyxx'thriax. Commander, your ship's quantum harmonizers, they can detect the rift's entry and exit points, right? Zyxx's crystalline structure vibrated in confusion. Of course, but... Perfect. Jenkins, remember that trick from Stellar Conquest IV? The one with the gravity wells? The OL slingshot maneuver. Jenkins grinned. You beautiful madman. Chen watched understanding dawn across both their faces. You're not seriously suggesting using their own quantum rifts as a weapons delivery system? That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Rodriguez's face glowed with manic enthusiasm. We'll need to modify the quantum harmonizers too. Absolutely not, Zyxx'thriax interrupted. The harmonizers are perfectly calibrated instruments of war, developed over millions of years. You cannot simply. Already done, Jenkins announced cheerfully. Got the idea from that time I modded my hoverbike to place synthwave through its anti-grav field. Before Zyxx could protest further, the human ships had begun executing what Rodriguez dubbed Operation Portal Physics. They were somehow using the modified harmonizers to predict where the Void Hunters would open their next rifts, then launching volleys of quantum torpedoes calculated to emerge from different rifts simultaneously. This defies all tactical logic. Strategic Overseer Clicks AA wailed as she watched human ships literally surfing gravitational waves between rifts. That's what makes it beautiful, Chen replied, coordinating the chaos with remarkable precision. Rodriguez, status on that gravity well? Almost there, sir. Jenkins, you remember how to drift in 0G. Like riding a mechanical bull at Uncle Jerry's wedding. The Void Hunters, their perfect adaptation algorithms struggling to process the humans' reality-bending maneuvers, found themselves caught in an impossible crossfire of their own quantum rifts. Rodriguez had somehow turned their greatest weapon into a cosmic game of pinball, with void torpedoes bouncing between dimensional tiers like scoring multipliers. Now, Jenkins, Rodriguez shouted, hit them with the Konami code special. The what, Zyxx asked, but his question was lost in the spectacular sight of Jenkins executing a series of moves that made several junior tacticians' crystalline forms crack in sympathy. The result was beyond anything the Eternal Dominion's tactical computers could process. The Void Hunters, trapped in a web of their own quantum rifts, were being ping-ponged between dimensions by precisely calculated torpedo volleys. Their perfect formations shattered as they tried to adapt to strategies pulled straight from what Rodriguez called the greatest hits of gaming history. Did you just defeat an ancient terror of the cosmos using video game tactics? Zyxx asks, his voice barely a whisper. More like a greatest hits compilation, Rodriguez replied, still typing furiously. Some Portal, a bit of Stellar Conquest, maybe a dash of that weird racing game Jenkins got banned from. Speaking of which, Jenkins, you ready for the finale? Born ready. Initiating what I like to call the bass drop of doom. The modified quantum harmonizers pulsed in sync, creating a cascade effect that collapsed the quantum rifts in on themselves. The Void Hunters, caught in the dimensional feedback loop, were sucked back into the void from whence they came. Silence fell over the battlefield. Zyxx'thriax's tactical computers had given up entirely and were displaying what appeared to be the error message equivalent of a shrug. Lieutenant Chen, Zyxx'thriax said finally, his crystalline form aligning into a pose that hadn't been used in millions of years, the configuration of profound humility. I believe I owe your species an apology. We thought we had perfected warfare, but you have shown us that perfection itself can be a weakness. Don't thank us yet, Chen replied with a smile. Wait until you see what Rodriguez wants to do with your quantum communication array. Something about turning it into, and I quote, the ultimate space rave. I do not know what a rave is, Zyxx'thriax admitted, but I suspect I am about to find out. Party at the quantum relay station. Jenkins broadcast on all frequencies. Rodriguez hit them with that playlist. As human music began pulsing through the quantum harmonizers, Zyxx'thriax watched his junior tacticians attempting to dance in their crystalline forms. Perhaps, he reflected, this was exactly what the Eternal Dominion had needed, a reminder that sometimes the best solutions come not from perfect calculation, but from the beautiful chaos of the young and inexperienced. Even if that chaos occasionally involved turning ancient weapons of war into impromptu disco balls. 1 month after the Void Hunters incident, Elder Commander Zyxx'thriax stood before the Galactic Coalition Council. His crystalline form arranged in what he hoped was a sufficiently humble configuration. In light of recent events, he announced, the Eternal Dominion formally requests that human military instructors be permanently assigned to all our training facilities. Specifically, he paused, his tactical computers still struggling with the words, we request Lieutenant Chen's team. In the observer's gallery, Jenkins nudged Rodriguez. Did you ever think you'd see the day when 50-million-year-old crystal warriors would be asking us for lessons? Chen whispered, but he was smiling. The council chambers erupted in a flurry of activity as Zyxx continued. Furthermore, we propose a complete overhaul of our tactical doctrine to incorporate what the humans call his crystalline structure vibrated slightly, thinking outside the box and winging it. Later at the Joint Species Training Facility, the changes were already evident. Junior tactician Zyxx'thriax was attempting to master what Jenkins called tactical trash talk during combat simulations. "Am I doing this correctly?" Zyxx'thriax asked, his crystalline form glowing with uncertainty. "Take that, you. Total noobs." "We'll work on it," Jenkins promised, trying not to laugh. "But hey, you got the spirit." Across the facility, Rodriguez was teaching a group of veteran Eternal commanders how to improvise during space combat. Several of them had cracked their crystalline structures trying to perform what he called 6 space drifts, but they were enthusiastically trying again. "Remember," Rodriguez called out, "sometimes the dumbest sounding plan is exactly what you need. Who wants to learn how to do a barrel roll while blasting another one bites the dust?" In his office, Zyxx reviewed the training reports with Chen. "I must admit," he said, "your methods still occasionally cause my tactical computers to crash." But the results, he gestured to a screen showing the latest combat readiness scores. "They speak for themselves." "Sometimes the best advantage is not knowing what you can't do," Chen replied. "Speaking of which, are you ready for your human slang lesson?" Zyxx's form aligned into what he'd learned was called a try me pose. "Hit me with your best shot." "That's actually perfect usage, sir." From outside came the sound of Jenkins teaching a squadron of Eternal warriors to yell Leroy Jenkins before charging into battle, followed by the distinct crystalline chiming of their attempts to high-five each other. "You know," Zyxx mused, "in 50 million years of warfare, we never once considered that combat could be fun." "Better late than never," Chen grinned. "Now, about that space rave Rodriguez is planning." The universe's oldest species had finally learned its most important lesson: sometimes the best teachers are the ones who don't know enough to know what's impossible.